More
Yep.
and more people are shorting her investments all the time. That's not a fun place to be. And if I was in a similar spot, we're going to talk about some of my investments coming up soon. Maybe I'll be claiming we're not in a bubble, depending on the hate mail that I get.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Wait, you're on the road?
Keeping you on your toes, man. Keeping you on your toes.
It looks like a Hilton.
That it is.
Yes.
One of the most impressive or saddest moments of your life. I just I've nothing to say with your like random obscure knowledge of hotellery. But yeah, I'm in a Hilton.
Have you ever worked with the consultant that like I worked with this one consultant? I may have told this before, but he was home so infrequently that one time he went home and drove to what he thought was his house, and he knocked on the door and someone else lived there. And then he like called his wife and was like, "Do we live somewhere else?" And she was like, "Yeah, like it's over here now." And she didn't even consult moving.
Hold on. At first, I thought you were saying that he was home so infrequently that he went to the wrong house.
No.
You're saying he
His
went
wife,
to the right house, but his wife had moved.
His wife had sold their family house, purchased a new family house without telling him. At least that's how the story goes.
I don't want to laugh at that. That's a wow.
Oh, it's so depressing. It's so depressing.
All right.
And who knows if it's true, but that's what I was told.
Can we right quick dive into the fishbowl? I need to get past that. Ooh.
Yeah, you want to kick off with some listener mail?
Oh yeah, love it.
All right. This is from Adam, physicist, really smart guy, also a good value investor. We might have him on the show sometime. So this is my favorite piece of listener mail in a while because, I mean, I'm going to read it to you, but basically my translation was like, Doogles is an idiot. That's how it came across for me. So first, he talks about ISAs, which we talked about, income sharing agreements. And he says, I don't know that I agree with 100% of this, but I always appreciate his perspective. He says ISAs are not remotely debt. It's more like equity. There's no leverage. And if your income gets cut in half, the interest coverage doesn't stays the same. It doesn't get cut in half. You can't be forced to default on it. And then he mentions, and I mean, you know the education space so well, Doogles, that I'm curious for this because I never did the deep dive on ISAs that I wanted to, but he says most ISA structures I've seen are progressive, and you do not pay if your income is below something like 50K. So it's far different than a student loan. Thoughts on that?
Is that it? That's the thing that calls me an idiot?
That's point one. That's point one.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Oftentimes you can go into a lot of nuance around topics in order to prove or disprove something. The definition of debt is you give me money and I owe it back to you. I think you can go into nuances saying that it's not as bad as most debts. You can talk about how most ISAs, blah, 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 but not all ISAs are created equal. They have different execution levers. And to say that it's not debt ignores the definition of debt.
I just love the fire in your eyes. You get so fired up when we talk about ISAs, and I haven't figured out the backstory here, but I just love this.
No,
I think it's so interesting because there's clearly like this nuance piece that's important here. Like if there's a certain income threshold, then it is debt if you're above the threshold, and it's not debt if you're below the threshold, right? Like it just seems like a more flexible and forgiving structure than your typical student debt. But it's probably such where you just can't make broad generalizations, and you'd have to look at the amount of traditional student debt someone might take versus ISA versus, like it's kind of apples to oranges, and so it's hard to compare.
I think that your statement that says that it's more forgiving in some circumstances, it's not as bad, it's not as punitive. Yeah. I can go with all that, but it is by definition debt. You give someone something, they owe it back to you. Now you can say there are certain triggers that make that so you didn't, or certain triggers if you didn't hit, right, then you wouldn't owe it back, but it's still debt. You could go into loans and say that there are certain loans that in certain circumstances you don't have to pay back.
You don't, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's still, you can talk about convertible notes
True.
Where like
true.
a convertible note can become equity at a certain, but it's still debt at that time. Like it just is debt. There isn't. I don't know how you can dance around that. I think that the point that they're making, right? And, Adam, sorry. I think the point that Adam is making is probably more that it's not as bad as debt, or that it's not bad. And I sure we can talk about that, but it's debt. Let me consult my good friend Merriam-Webster.
No, it's funny. Like I've never, in the past 2 weeks, I've spent more time thinking about the true definition of debt than I ever thought I would. Because I thought it was pretty self-evident.
2 words. Definition number 1, Merriam-Webster.com. 2 words. Something owed.
Yeah, and so in an ISA, you owe future income.
Done. Definition. Done.
Oh man, you're more fun from a Hilton.
It actually, this, I think, to the broader point, I'm being crass here, but to the broader point, I think that it's worth a lot of conversation, because again, not all ISAs are created equal. It's really interesting. There was a friend of mine before that he's from Australia and went to school there. And basically from like college wise, once you leave college, you owe, similar to like what was stated by Adam here, you owe the money back once you have a job, once you make a certain amount of income.
Yeah.
He left the country and is in the US. So he like never, he doesn't know anything.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think, similar. I think that it's interesting, that concept, right? And I do think that it's more forgiving than a lot of the structures that we have around student loan debt today, but I still do think it's debt.
No, you get me so curious, and so our listeners know, like, you are well versed in the education space. So if I forced you to make a blanket statement, would you say ISAs are probably better than the typical U.S. debt structure today?
If I had to give a one-word answer, I'd say yes.
Okay.
The longer answer I'd provide is, and this is, I make crazy analogies, but I think it's similar to some of the thoughts that I have around the crypto space, and that I think the structure of the ISA is very powerful for what we could do with education. I think we haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, it's not refined, and it's not. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I think there's also a point around who's delivering the ISA, because a lot of organizations that are putting ISAs out there are for-profit organizations that are trying to figure out the ISA business model. And I think that starts to make it a little bit more hairy. No one's figured out the ISA business model such that it works to make a scaled organization yet. But if you think about going back to that example I brought up around Australia, where you have the government effectively is running the ISA, then I think that does start to be more favorable for individuals. But the ISA itself as a structure, I do think it's a good thing. And I think we should figure out how to scale that in a way that's good for the consumer. And that's also potentially a business model that someone could run efficiently and effectively. Yeah.
So the federal government plays such a huge role in the student loan market. And we talked about this, maybe 5 or 6 weeks back, in how they play such a role in the inflation of the cost of college education in this country, because both sides can get around this idea of, let's give more money for student loans because we want everyone to be able to so-called afford an education. How come the federal government doesn't have an ISA arm? Like, this seems just obvious to me.
There are a lot of reasons why the federal government doesn't do things. I think generally I think a main reason for this is probably that it hasn't been the way that things are run, and there's so many systems that would have to be unwound in order for that to be something that's implemented. But I think that's primarily, I think, a lot of it. So even going back to what you were saying, I can't remember if this was last week or the week before, but we were discussing the defaulting, right, and how it's really difficult to write off or discharge student loan debt. And I think part of what was discussed makes sense, in that basically the fact that it's so hard to discharge makes it so that people are giving loans that they don't even care about underwriting effectively, because you're going to get it back no matter what, right? And so then more people are taking on debt. And there's a negative side of that. There's a negative side of that. But the positive side of that is even people that are from, I'll say, disadvantaged situations that actually, if you did underwrite them properly, wouldn't be able to go to school, can go to school. I only state that not to say that it is good or bad, but just to say that these systems are complicated and difficult to unwind.
No, I love that perspective. And I often think about things like from a cold-hearted, like, finance perspective. Not necessarily cold-hearted, but like pure numbers. And yeah, Yeah, that's a good point. So the other thing Adam mentioned, and Adam, thank you for the email. I won't spend too much time on it because we were joking around this. He just was mentioning that in the fraternal twins study, they were using the twins as a control, and that's how they pinned down genetics. So we were kind of going back and forth about, hey, they might talk to each other. Well, obviously they talk to each other, but he's pointing out, and I think fairly, especially if our tone came across incorrectly in the previous conversation, that's kind of the only way you pin down genetics. And to make the conclusion of that study, you're stuck with things like, oh, they probably talk to each other. There's just no other way to do it, unless I think at one point you said like if the twins were separated at birth or moved to different countries or something, then you could even have a stronger control around measuring
rip
their
families
habits,
apart for the sake of academic papers.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're done with you. You cannot see your brother for 20 years, so we can figure out if you're a good investor or not based on genetics.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fair. If I did come across too crass in the ISA piece, I didn't mean to. I was just we're here for entertainment value in the end.
You're good, Adam. Thanks for the mail. Thanks for listening. Keep them coming, guys. You can hit us on Twitter at Skippy Doogles and skippydoogles@gmail.com. Doogles, what's in your fishbowl today?
Do you know where I want to start?
I mean, hopefully it's Alibaba.
Well,
where do you want to start?
Your question was really a statement of
Hedgehogs.
Yeah, I want to talk about this 2-part article that was released last week called "Are You a Hedgehog or a Fox?" It came out in American Consequences. And then I want to roll that into an article in the Institutional Investor. That's how Millennial Investors Lost Millions on Bill Ackman's SPAC. I'm going to have a 2-parter here, but hopefully I think the first part shouldn't go that long. So,
hey, fun fact to interrupt. I've been featured in the Institutional Investor before. Do you know this?
I love it. I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. I know some people who know some people. Anyway, tell me about hedgehogs.
Yes, I'm a big fan of the concept of the hedgehog and the fox. It's an Isaiah Berlin essay from 60 years ago. I'll give you the high level and then dive into what this article is about. So the high level of the Isaiah Berlin article is actually based off of this. I'm going to get the pronunciation of this name wrong, but there was a poet way back in the day, Archicolaus. One of his most famous quotes was, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." So the concept of the hedgehog and the fox is you can have individuals who are foxes, who are sly, they're cunning, they try a whole bunch of things, they have all these moves, kind of like if you think about a fox out in the wild, you have to be able to survive multiple situations. Then you have the hedgehog, which is good at one thing. You can do one thing and you can do it really well. So this article brings up, in the non-investing world, it brings up Tiger Woods as the ultimate hedgehog. Like from the time you're 2, you pick up a golf club and all that you've ever done is play golf and you're incredible at it. And the article then points out how most successful investors, according to this article, also are hedgehogs. They have a set of principles they follow, and that's the way they invest. They bring up Chris Mayer, Warren Buffett, Howard Marks as examples of that. They have their principles, they go about it. And then they said there was one fox investor who they think was great. Well, not only one, but there's one that they bring up who they think is also really good, which is Jim Rogers of the Quantum Fund, who invested with George Soros for a while, right? And said that's someone that could just pick up a whole bunch of things, analyze a lot of different assets, et cetera, and invest.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's what this article is about, how most great investors are hedgehogs. It's possibly a fox, but most great investors are hedgehogs. So before I go on, any questions or thoughts before I roll this into Bill Ackman?
I mean, I just was Googling hedgehogs. They're kind of cute. And I really like when they roll up.
How many times does Sonic need to come up on this podcast? How amazing is this?
Such a good point.
It's the thing. We got to bring him on the show. So to roll this to the Bill Ackman piece, Isaiah Berlin, Archicolaus, however you pronounce the old poet, when they talk about how the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one thing, like what is the one big thing that the hedgehog knows?
To protect itself.
Exactly. The hedgehog can roll up like a ball, put its spikes out, protect itself. And the article says that one thing, if you translate it into investor terms, is being able to avoid catastrophic loss. Like the thing that the hedgehog does really well is to be able to manage risk, to be able to defend itself, to be able to not die, right? That's the one big thing.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of that in the past, so we don't have to go into detail, but just about avoiding the death line, right? Staying in the game.
I mean, the Buffett quote there is like basically cash is life, cash is air. You know, like he might fall into hedgehog category if we were classifying. He probably would, more likely than Fox, because he's been slow to move into tech and areas that he doesn't understand, right? But he did evolve to a more progressive piece of value investing. But yes, he's always concerned about, rule number one is not lose money, and rule number two is see rule number one, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's all about surviving.
That's exactly right. And so this article, How Millennial Investors Lost Millions on Bill Ackman's SPAC, you can guess from the title, these were not hedgehogs. This article is such a good lesson for people to read. It's phenomenal. I'm not going to cover the whole article, but I do want to hit some key points from the lead-in story to the article, because I think it's all the things. So SPACs, again, are special purpose acquisition companies. They're basically shell corporations that go public with a whole boatload of cash with the mission to go buy something, right? That's a SPAC. Bill Ackman's big SPAC, it was called Tontine, and he raised it late last year, and it was the largest SPAC ever, over $4 billion.
Yeah, and let me just jump in. So Bill Ackman, if you're not familiar, is the founder and CEO of Pershing Square Capital, Harvard guy, worth about $3 billion, known mostly as an activist investor. That might help some of the listeners.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that background. And last year he got momentarily also famous because he had a short on the stock market right before the coronavirus crash, and then sold at the bottom. So he just made like a whole quick buck, and I that's tied to this actually, because that did put him on the map for last year when a lot of retail investors entered the space, right, and got all Robin Hoodie. They then see this guy who they're like is obviously a market genius because of what he just did, and he has his track record.
But really impressive track record.
Yeah, very impressive track record. But the retail investors that might have been new on the scene also saw, like Wonderkin, right? So they see this, and then he raises $4 billion in this largest SPAC when SPACs were also getting hot with it. What this article lays out for this lead-in story was there was a psychiatrist who was not named in the article. He basically is 35 years old. He comes from a family immigrant household, right? And he is not a trained financier, but he is a trained psychiatrist. And he lays that out himself by saying, and I quote, "Just because I have specialized training doesn't mean I can't be just as much of a fool as the guy next door," is what he says. So what he did was he started saving money as he was doing his residency, I believe it was. And he got up a few $100,000 and said, "I'm making some money on on this investment game over the last couple of years. I see this SPAC and it seems like a sure thing." He actually says, "I considered this a safe, calculated bet."
Man, we don't give investment advice on this show, but if he would have been listening to this show, I don't think he would have thrown. We've been trashing this concept and saying it has a very low probability of success since day one.
And the way his safe calculated bet, the way that he goes about investing in the SPAC is by buying call options.
Oh, come
so
on.
he buys call options at a strike price of $25 on Tontine. And to give a little background on options and call options and how you make money and how you don't. Options are a way to leverage, basically, by you're buying the right by paying a premium in order to buy a stock at a predetermined price. And so you're basically saying, I'm making this up. If he's buying at a strike price of 25, and let's say he's buying 100 shares, right? So he's buying one contract that's 100 shares of this SPAC. And the SPAC goes to $50, he may have bought that contract, right, for like a couple $1,000s, and he might be able to then sell that contract for tens of thousands of dollars. So that's like the effective leverage that occurs. However, if the contract is under $25, you get nothing, right? Because you have the right to buy it at 25. If it's less than, obviously you're not going to buy it. So he put everything that he had, his entire investment portfolio, into this set of contracts, right? At one point, it was worth over $1 million. So he bought June 18 calls. This is just a couple of months ago that it was called June 18 calls with a strike price of $25. The stock on that date was worth $23.
Okay.
So nothing.
Yeah.
Everything that he had invested before, all the money he'd saved, all the long nights and weekends, everything gone at that point. And when he says he considered it to be a safe, calculated bet, the reason he says this is because he'd seen the track record of Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman was making rap videos and putting them out on the line, right, about how great this is. There was like a guaranteed purchase that was going to happen in Q1. That didn't happen. Then there was on June 4th of this year, finally the SPAC didn't say that it was going to buy a company, but it was going to buy 10% of Warner Music, I think it was, something like that. And so that was Universal Music. It was going to buy 10% of Universal Music. Wasn't going to close until the fall, but regardless, nothing got bought. And so his takeaway, outside of I should have stuck to psychiatry, was he went on Reddit and he said, don't buy calls on pre-DA SPACs, which means deal announcement. So don't buy calls on pre-deal announcement SPACs is the takeaway. My takeaway is a bit more abstract, but I'm gonna hand it over.
My takeaway is don't buy calls, don't buy SPACs, have some diversification, and there's like 5 more things. I mean, this guy doesn't need my sympathy. This just makes me sad. That's really unfortunate.
I think it's such an important story to read because it's not this person isn't a lot of like what we discussed, the couple, right, that was on TikTok Investors, like I buy on the way up, sell on the way down. It's like YOLO. Like that's not what he was doing. He wasn't like YOLOing fully, at least according to the tone that's in this. I wasn't in his home, right, and seeing what he did. But I mean, he went out on the limb and did some recklessness, but it seems like he legitimately wasn't trying to YOLO or like give it to the man. It was
there's some component of trying to get rich quick, I think.
That is true.
Because that basically gets to YOLO in a way. I mean, when you go back to Hedgehog versus Fox, right? And you think about and sorry to do this, but you think about cryptos and all the exciting stuff happening in cryptos and the fact that a lot of people feel like they can get rich quick. I totally see all the foxes in that space being like, oh, the hedgehog they can't comprehend how cutting edge this is.
Yeah.
Or like whatever else. And it's an interesting dynamic between those two like investing types, right? In some cases, I think they're few and far between, but the fox actually might get a concept more quickly and therefore get wealthy in short order, but it's just really, really rare.
One thing that you just said makes me think about I'm going to overblow this a little bit, but the Michael Burry feud that is now going on between he and Cathie Wood, because you just said the hedgehog doesn't understand how cutting edge this is, right? What was Cathie Wood's reaction when Michael Burry came out and said that he was buying put options?
Let's reset. So Michael Burry of Big Short fame with the Michael Lewis book and movie, who basically called the housing crisis and made tons of money because of it. He now runs Scion Capital Management, and he recently has started betting against ARK Investment, who's run by Cathie Wood, and she's been mentioned on the show previously in crypto conversation, a lot of conversations. Doogles likes to call her portfolio a YOLO trip to nonsense, but if you're not familiar, she bets on cutting edge technology, and so her stocks are high flying momentum stocks that are very expensive in terms of metrics like P/E ratios. So when the news comes out that Michael Burry, I can never say his name, bets against her portfolio, her response, I don't have the tweet in front of me, Doogles. Should we pull up the actual tweet?
Yeah, let's pull up the tweet. So she says, to his credit, Michael Burry made a great call based on fundamentals and recognized the calamity brewing in the housing/mortgage market. I do not believe that he understands the fundamentals that are creating explosive growth and investment opportunities in the innovation space. What is the innovation space? Just to be clear, so Cathie Wood is imploding right now. I'm not even saying that her funds are going to implode. I'm saying that she seems to be, via social media, imploding right now. I state that because some of the things that she's saying are what you say when you are actually somewhat desperate. And I don't see her in day to day, but there must be something under the hood, because there was something else that I saw her say. She came out and said, we could not be further from a bubble.
Yeah, that's not a fact. That's not factual.
that is not like every piece of evidence. No, nearly. I shouldn't say every.
Yeah,
There's so many pieces of evidence that show that we are in bubble territory. That doesn't mean it's going to pop tomorrow. That doesn't mean it's going to pop next year, any of that. But there's so much to say we couldn't be further shows me that you don't understand what a bubble is, first of all. And that scares me.
I don't think it's that she doesn't understand. I think I hate like throwing shade or talking ill of people, but Doogles is giving me a look. But no, like she's protecting her wallet, I would say. Like she can't go around saying we're in a bubble because that would be a reason to short her funds, which is what smart people like Michael Burry are doing.
Yes. I actually no, I can't say yes. So I get what you're saying, and I lean into that. I think that the reason that I state that she's imploding is because, per what you said, she can't go around saying we're in a bubble. Fully agree.
Yeah.
However, when you say we can't be further from a bubble, that's not saying we're in a bubble. Like she's trying to, and from what I see, it feels like, I don't know her. I don't actually know what she's trying to do, but it sounds like she's trying too aggressively to state how safe things are, that there must be some, like, duck looks calm over the water, but underneath is getting buck wild. That has to be going on. These statements are not of someone of like sturdy ground.
Yeah, if I'm armchair quarterbacking this, she probably just feels threatened because more and more people are shorting her investments all the time. That's not a fun place to be. And if I was in a similar spot, we're going to talk about some of my investments coming up soon. Maybe I'll be claiming we're not in a bubble, depending on the hate mail that I get. All right.
Like, I don't mean to. Well, I guess I can't say I don't mean to throw shade because that's probably exactly what I'm doing. But
let's kindly throw shade though.
Yeah, she's in a pickle right now. You're right. I mean, someone's coming out with an ETF that is shorting an individual portfolio manager, right? Like that's a pickle. Michael Burry, who has a lot of respect, right, in areas like this, is buying tens of millions of dollars, right, of put options against you. Like, that is a position where she has to feel really vulnerable, and she's down this year so far, not by a heck of a lot, but she's down in a time where the market is up double digits. Like, that's not a good position to be in. So I'm sure she's getting a lot of emails from investors, and it feels like she has to come out and say some stuff. It's just that if I were her PR person, I would say that seemingly desperate statements isn't the way to do it, but saying things like there's more room to run. Say how much you believe in the stocks, and state that, and don't make platitudes about explosive growth in the innovation space, which exactly, I don't know what industry that is. I haven't seen the SIC code for that. All right. Anyway, sorry. I'm not throwing shade.
You just went sick code on me. Oh my goodness. Wow. So this is why we'll wrap up with Cathie Wood. But this is why many of the investors I respect most have periods where they go, hey, there's nothing to buy right now. I'm going to cash. Have your money back. Like, she's not the type that's ever going to think that. I think it's fair to say. But if she did, I would have so much more. If she's had, like, I've had an awesome 24 months where I've been one of the best performing funds around, like, and now things are a little too hot and I'm taking a step back, like, that'd be amazing. But that's not how this works for 99% of humans.
So she's not in an enviable position right now, but alas.
Yeah, so, let's switch gears. Let's talk about something more fun.
Why don't you spit a little bit on Jack Ma?
All right, so this ties in I think it's like episode 6, Doogles. We did a whole episode, or at least a big part of it, called Where is Jack Ma? And it was just us speculating about how he'd fallen off the map and what that meant. And that obviously ties to Alibaba, the company that he founded and is the face of, right? So what's interesting about Alibaba in the value investing community is that folks like Charlie Munger and Manish Pabrai and Guy Spear and Li Lu have all taken positions recently. And I should say the Li Lu thing is speculation because he's not required to publish his holdings like the rest of them are. Also, though, Doogles, on the 13F conversation, if you look at Whale Wisdom, and they do like a heat map. Alibaba's in the top 10 of purchases happening fund wide, which I don't care about as much as like value focused. Another value investor that just took a Alibaba holding is Tom Russo. So I've been digging into the space because when people like that are all buying at the same time, it just seems like it's worth looking into. It's a fascinating case, man. Do you have thoughts on Alibaba just as a company or as a potential investment?
I'll give a little story here. Yes, I do have thoughts, and I'll give those to you after I give my anecdote. My wife, for probably about the last 3 months, every now and again, she'll be like, should we be looking at Alibaba? Right. And she'll ask this question, should we be looking at Alibaba? And I've been saying, one, it hasn't dropped far enough for my own take. And two, like China hasn't been kind to me recently, which is not a reason to not. But I'm watching China closely to see like every other day they're coming out with new like regulation or statements around regulation. So it's just like, it hasn't dropped far enough for me. Let's watch more. I've also talked to her over the last couple of months because Monish Pabrai is someone that actually didn't come onto my radar until William Green. But since then, I've talked to her about Monish. And I mentioned 2 weeks ago or something, I was like, oh, I was just checking out his 13F and saw he took this really big position in Alibaba. And she's like throwing up her hands. I'm like, I've been telling you. So anyway,
I'm the best investor in this household.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Give me the password. So anyway, I've been watching Alibaba for this year, basically as it's been declining. My thought right now is, and I gave you basically 2 clues to it, is I still don't think it's for my own sake, it hasn't gone far enough down. Alibaba right now is at its like close to end of 2019 price, which like isn't that low. And to me, the amount of risk that sits in China right now in its regard, and I don't have like Monish and these other folks, they have conversations I am not privy to, right? And so there may be things they know or don't know, or they just flat out maybe just be better, right? And so I don't have all that information, but so I'm at a position right now as a retail investor where I'm just like, risk is too high, and it hasn't fallen that low.
Yeah, so it is definitely at 52-week lows. It's been north of $300 a share, and it's currently at 158 or something. I'm maybe halfway through my research, and we don't give investment advice on the show, but I'll tell you, in the 150 range, I start to get really interested. In the 130 range, I feel like I almost have to buy the thing. But the real challenge, challenge.
Let's talk
here,
at 130. Let's talk at 130.
Yeah, right. Is not necessarily about the company. You look at their like revenue growth over the last 10 years, and oh my, that thing's a rocket ship. Now their margins are dropping, and they're not turning that into as much free cash flow as I'd like. But the word monopoly gets thrown around in the space, and the threat to the People's Bank of China with Ant Financial seems to be a real thing, which is like a pro and con, right? In a way, it's a way for Chinese citizens to be less dependent on a bank that they probably don't love being super dependent on. But the threat that comes with that is the government just being like, you're too much of a threat to this core principle of ours, and we're going to squash you, or we're going to put you out of business, or we're going to hurt your growth prospects. So if this was a U.S. company trading at these multiples, I would have already jumped in, right?
Goodness.
But it's not that easy. When I start to be in my research cycle, like I am with Alibaba right now, when it pops up on my radar with smart people and everything else, one of my favorite pastimes is just to root for the thing to go down. This week, man, it had some tough days, and I was as happy as can be.
That 6% day? Woo!
Yeah. I hope this thing continues to fall off cliff. I'll root for negative news out of China like no one else, and then we'll see if I actually end up taking a position or not.
It's fascinating because, to your point, the prospects of this thing make its current price like almost a no-brainer. Like if you take away all the macro environment, to me, right?
Yeah. But, I mean, it gets compared to Amazon. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, and this is exactly what you said. Like I'm just repeating what you said. Is that I don't know if it's going to be allowed to make money in the future.
Right.
And so it could make all the money, and it might not be allowed to make any of the money.
Okay, so that ties back. I'll just hit the high levels to one of the best articles I read this week. It's in the Wall Street Journal. It's called Jack Ma's Costliest Business Lesson. China has only one leader. it really details not only like Jack Ma's growth, his ideas with Alibaba and Ant Group and everything else, some of the missteps he made. You know, like one of the things I mentioned is in the COVID response area, he kind of showed up and like bought, I think he bought a meal for like frontline workers and thanked them. And the Chinese government was like pissed, like you don't get any credit for this response. You can't thank these people. And there's a bunch of little missteps like that where he took meetings with President Trump or President Obama, and that was not received lightly. There was one get together, I think it was in Seattle, with Chinese entrepreneurs, and they each had 3 minutes to talk to the Chinese president, and everyone else took 3 minutes, and he took 10, and that was not well received. So he's been battling this, I'm the next Bezos or Gates or Steve Jobs type American ideals with I'm the founder of a world's best company versus the comfort level of his homeland with being that public and that well-renowned. And I think that's really hurt the company in a way. But there's other factors that have hurt the company, like them feeling like it's a threat to the People's Bank of China. So long story short, I won't go through the whole article. If you're interested, I highly recommend it. I'll put it on the Twitter at Skippy Doogles. But just kind of fascinating piece that's been evolving for more than a year now, and now it's maybe turning into an investment opportunity, or maybe it's just something that is fun to watch from afar.
It's definitely something to watch. And you missed perhaps his greatest misstep.
What's that?
Dressing up and dancing like Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah. No, that is probably his greatest misstep.
I mean, if anyone's the king of anything, right? Before LeBron, you got Michael. I don't even know what that's trying to say, but it's not positive. Put your little sequin gloves away, Mr. Ma.
All right. I wasn't even going to go there, but I'm reading a book right now called The Club. It's about English Premier League soccer. It's written by Joshua Robinson and Jonathan Clegg. Really fascinating piece of the business side of sports, but I'm taking it almost as an investing book. So, Doogles, I have a quiz for you, and then I have a fun fact about the King of Pop. 2 quizzes. First is, who is the primary figure responsible for the explosion of the English Premier League becoming the most profitable sports league in the world and the most watched sports league in the world?
Michael Jackson.
It's Rupert Murdoch.
Okay.
So,
I mean, that's like a real answer. I was like, how's he tying these things together? So
I'll get to Michael Jackson in a second. So basically, the English Premier League was, I mean, you go back to like the late 80s, some of the stadiums were falling down. They had standing room only. I mean, it was not comparable to the NFL in any way, shape, or form. They wouldn't even show live matches in Britain because they were worried people wouldn't come to the stadiums if it was on TV, everything else. Rupert Murdoch buys a new satellite dish provider called Sky. It's Sky Sports now. And no one was signing up for his satellite service. So basically, he needed to find a way to get subscribers. And because of that, he launched a massive bid that did he paid 1,000 times what they had been paying or something else. That number's wrong, but huge multiple. And then when he was able to build a successful business model around that, like everyone else came on board and they started selling. They sell into 200 markets now, all with 3-year contracts. And it's this just multi-billion dollar business. Manchester United is the most popular franchise in the world. Really, really fascinating background here. But that leads me to my second question for you. If you sum up all the salaries of the 20 teams in the Premier League, they each have 25 players. Any guesses on what the aggregate salary figures of those players are?
Like annual salary, you said, right?
Annual, yeah. 1 year.
Hold up. I'd say 2.2 billion.
Gosh, you're good. I mean, it's well north of $1 billion. And to me, just to think about that is crazy. I don't know today's figure, if it actually is 2 billion or what. You have royalty from the United Arab Emirates buying teams. You have Stan Kroenke. You have the world's richest people flock to this league to spend money. And what's so crazy about that, when you go back to Rupert Murdoch, is now you have entire cities in London, or areas of London, that are completely revitalized based on the amount of spending that happened for some of these clubs.
It's
Or,
amazing.
Cities in like Manchester is nothing special in my eyes. They have two of the premier brands in all the world as it relates to the world's most popular game. Fascinating book if you're interested.
Well, I think I'm going to put that on the list. Thank you.
Yeah,
Look at you selling
it's pretty
books,
good.
slinging.
That's how I roll, man.
What else you got?
One more thing in the fishbowl, Doogles. Coinbase announced that they're going to purchase over $500 million in crypto, put it on their balance sheet. Now, we've talked about other companies doing similar things. The most famous example here is MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor taking out debt to do Bitcoin, and both you and I have concerns about that. The fun part about this news, in my eyes, is Coinbase is in the business of selling crypto. So, in a way, they're putting their money where their mouth is. The other fun piece about this is they're buying a wide range of cryptos, including Ethereum and other decentralized finance tools. So, to my knowledge, they're the first company to buy like kind of a basket of cryptos rather than just Bitcoin. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're saying going forward they'll invest 10% of all their profits in crypto. So
is this a, sorry to interrupt, do you think this is kind of a trying to fuel the rising tide raises all ships type situation where they need the industry to have legitimacy and liquidity and all that stuff in order to survive? And if they need to create them, like further create the market, then so be it, or something different?
I mean, with Coinbase, I don't know that it is. We've debated about that word need in the past as it relates to investing, right? I don't think they need it, but I do think Brian Armstrong, who's the founder, felt like crypto can have a positive impact on the world. He runs a nonprofit called Give Crypto, which I think is pretty cool. And he sees the optimistic side of this space, and then he's just kind of putting his money where his mouth is. He founded Coinbase to try and make it easier to buy and sell crypto, and he took it public, and so far it's been a big success. So it's funny because as critical as I was about Michael Saylor, and regardless of the outcome on that, I still think he had the wrong process in making that decision. Coinbase, I feel like, is doing it in a much more responsible way that says, this is our business. And the reason this is our business is because we're optimistic about it. And if we're optimistic about it, it makes sense for us to put our money where our mouth is and actually buy some of this stuff.
This is going to be a space. And I'm fascinated in some of the points you brought up before to see where Coinbase specifically falls in the international arena. I think they got into Japan, I think, recently.
Just went to Japan, yeah.
Right. But I'm curious internationally, because as you've stated, like internationally, there are other organizations, right? Whether that's government or otherwise, that might end up being more of the holder exchange, whatever, of crypto. So it's gonna be interesting uphill battle. I think I don't mean uphill even necessarily negatively. I just mean like it's early days, it's nascent, and so there's a lot to evolve in the space. But I'm fascinated to watch it.
Yep, I think that's it, man.
All right, as always. You can get a hold of us, skippydoogles@gmail.com, at skippydoogles on Twitter. Be sure to rate, review, follow, subscribe, depending on what service you use. Thank you for listening.
Peace.